Good afternoon. We're very privileged to have the Chief Executive of the Refugee Council this afternoon for the Intelligence Forum's Who Are You podcast. Enver, thank you very much indeed for joining us. And also thank you for speaking at Intelligence Forums last year. It was deeply appreciated. Can I just ask about your professional journey to how you've arrived at where you are today?
Yeah, it's been an interesting professional journey, perhaps not one that people might expect, because I started out my career as a trainee in the BBC, actually in BBC World Service, when it was based in Bush House. And then I went on to work as a BBC journalist for 10 years. Then I decided that if I was going to change the world, I needed to actually try and work for campaigning organizations and organizations that had a clear social justice mission. So I moved into the voluntary sector. I think I got disillusioned with the advent of 24-hour news back then and the ability to effect change as a BBC journalist. So I went into the voluntary sector. My first job was actually in prison reform, trying to address issues that are very similar today in relation to the state of prisons: overcrowding, drug use, all the kind of issues that dominate the headlines today. And then I came to the rapid conclusion that actually, if you're going to address why people end up in prison, you needed to look at what happened to them as children. So I moved to work in children's charities, some of the big brand children's charities, including Bernardo's. And then I worked my way up into leadership positions and then took my first CEO role running a charity working with disadvantaged young people, mainly in London, called Just for Kids Law. And then really coming to the Refugee Council was a culmination of a number of personal ambitions and personal kind of commitments. My mother came to the UK as an immigrant fleeing apartheid South Africa in the 1960s. As a South African Indian whose father had been involved in the anti-apartheid struggle, my grandfather. And then my father's family were Jewish refugees fleeing the pogroms many generations back to come and settle in Merseyside. So I'd always had an interest and personal commitment to the refugee cause. I knew the Refugee Council. It was one charity that I'd thought one day I'd love to lead that, and the opportunities arose and I was successful. And the rest, as they say, is pretty much history.
So did they find you? Did they sort of kind of know that you were really had a strong interest in the Refugee Council's work, or did you sort of nudge them in your direction? Sorry, that's a very nosy question, isn't it?
No, that's okay. I mean, there were headhunters, recruitment agency on it, and I had the conversation, and, they felt I would be a good fit. I think they were looking for someone who could demonstrate genuine passion and commitment with the refugee cause. They weren't looking for someone who was just looking to advance their career by taking on a leadership role in a charity. They wanted someone that genuinely believed in the cause and the issue and was personally very committed and dedicated to it.
And personally touched by it.
Absolutely.
Within your family.
Yeah. My own family story really matters to me. I think also my background, my heritage, being mixed race, having experienced racism growing up in and around Manchester as a child in the 70s and then 80s. There hasn't been a mixed race, non-white CEO of the Refugee Council since it was set up in 1951. So, that was significant. My heritage kind of really matters. And as world events have played out, such as in the Middle East during my time in post, being able to talk about my background, my heritage, I think has really connected with staff in the organisation.
What would you say your greatest challenges are, and what is the most satisfying aspect of your work?
I think it's incredibly challenging working on an issue which is regularly in the headlines and which is such a political and politicized issue and is actually becoming increasingly polarized.
Yeah.
And is also incredibly volatile. You're never quite sure in the external world what is going to happen next. We've had a whole number of significant moments, whether that's been multiple deaths in the Channel, the riots last summer when violent protesters attacked a hotel with refugees in where we work. The actual violence was being live streamed from the hotel by people in the hotel, refugees to my staff. We've had the refugee crises as a consequence of what's happened in Ukraine, in Afghanistan. We've had crises in the asylum system, in asylum hotels and in asylum reception centres. And it's been constantly dealing and grappling with those external events, but also the deep political nature of our issue and how it polarizes communities and how we navigate the politics, how we navigate the polarization, and how, as an organization, we ensure we look after ourselves so we don't get pulled all over the place as a consequence of the operating environment. And we're very clear about our strategy and what we're trying to achieve.
Would you say one of the challenges you also have is misinformation?
Misinformation is huge, and I think, just going back to what you're saying, what is the most satisfying thing? I think the most satisfying thing is actually when we receive incredible messages from the public, when we see the change that we deliver working with refugees and people in the asylum system, when we receive the messages from them about the difference it's made to their lives, but also the satisfaction I get from leading a charity when staff feel that we are doing a good job speaking out, engaging in the public debate. And we get recognition for that from politicians, from journalists, from other people in the charity sector, but also from people across different sectors. And they acknowledge how important our organization's voice and role is.
Do you think that, I know that you wouldn't be the person to sort of mention this, but you were the CEO, charity CEO in 2023 of the year. And the importance of your work, no doubt, played a large part in that award. Is that a fair comment? And also how you promoted this cause?
I think so. I think it was a reflection of that, but I also believe that, great leadership is about the team that you build around you. It's about the organization that you create. And we've also made a lot of changes to the organization in how we operate, how we run. We're still deep in organizational change and transformation. We're going to be launching an exciting new brand in March. So I think it's a reflection of the fact that, I've been leading on a very prominent issue, but it's also a reflection of the fact of how the organization has changed and positioned itself over the last few years too. And it was a fantastic accolade. But as I say, leadership's about more than the leader. It's about the brilliant people behind you and the team that you build. So it's a credit to my team just as much as it is to me.
I think when we look at history, and does your organization look at history? Because if you look at things like the kinder transport, and if we had known how things were going to evolve from what I will term the terrible to the hideous, the terrible in 1938 to the hideous of 1939 to 45, obviously our doors would have been wider open to more people. So do you sort of look at those examples? And I know one of your former CEO, President Alf Dubs, Lord Dubs, was on one of those transports as a child.
Right. That's right. He was, and over 90 years old today. He's an extraordinary ambassador of ours and an extraordinary champion of our cause. And I think what that history tells us is that, after what happened during that period of history, the world chose to say never again. It chose to recognize that anyone who is fleeing persecution, torture, potential death, who's being trafficked, has a right to be granted protection, and nations have a duty to provide safety to those whose lives are at threat, who have no choice but to take very dangerous journeys, because it's not possible to get on a plane or to access a visa or to take a safe and legal journey when you're in that predicament. And, people fled the horrors of Nazi Germany, taking incredibly dangerous journeys. Often people forget having to get all their worldly financial means and hand it over to people who would allow them passage, in the way that people have to pay people smugglers today. And, today, providing that protection and safety to people who are in that situation matters just as much as it did then. It's not old-fashioned or out of date to want to provide protection and safety to someone who is a torture victim or a torture survivor, or whose life is at threat.
No price on kindness. No price on kindness.
No price on kindness. No price on the notion of a shared humanity. No price on the notion that we are a collective humanity, that it's not a world of us and them. It's a world of we, one humanity, one humankind, where we recognize that there is a role and a shared responsibility to provide sanctuary and safety to those who need it.
I've got one final question. I could keep you here all afternoon, but I suspect the Refugee Council would have something to say about it if I did. But that final question is climate change and the effect on your work. Could you provide a comment on that, please?
Yeah, climate change, look, it's a huge issue. But what is interesting about the impact of climate change on migration is that it's not entirely clear how it will impact on migration. At the moment, a lot of displacement as a consequence of climate change is within countries or within regions. I think sometimes there's a lot of fear spread about climate change by those who are trying to portray a world where, Western nations are going to be inundated or overwhelmed by people on the move as a result of migration. And it absolutely is an issue, but I would argue that it's going to be more of an issue on a regional basis. And let's remember, today, 3/4 of people that have to flee because of war, because of persecution, because of violence, want to stay in neighboring countries. It's no surprise that when Russia invaded Ukraine, the majority of Ukrainians that fled stayed in Poland. They wanted to be able to get back home as quickly as possible. It's the same in relation to Afghanistan and neighboring countries, and indeed the same in relation to Syria when Syrians fled to Lebanon. The reality is that we need to look at how we support regions that are affected by big displacements as a consequence of geopolitical factors, as a consequence of climate change, and really understand how Western nations have a role to play on the international stage to support those regional nations that bear the largest responsibility, and that often that responsibility that they have to shoulder is not recognized fully by Western nations, who are too worried about building walls, pulling up the drawbridge, and having a fortress of exclusion in place out of self-interest.
And we've been there before, and it didn't work out well then either. So I'd just like to thank you very much indeed for joining this afternoon, this podcast. It's deeply appreciated. And I'd also like to wish you the very best in your work in the future. And I do hope that we keep in touch.
That's very kind. Thanks very much.